The evening in the kitchen is quiet, save for the sound of running water. Leah watches the back of her mother, Hyeon, washing a cup. She's been gathering her courage for several minutes. "Mom, can I sleep over at Sarah's on Saturday?" she finally says. "It's her birthday, and all the girls from my class will be there." Hyeon places the cup on the drying rack and slowly turns around. She looks at her daughter, not with anger, but with a very tired look. "No, Leah." "But why?" Leah's voice rises. "I'm an adult now." "Because I said no. There won't be any adults in the apartment, and I don't even want to hear about it. The subject is closed." Leah opens her mouth to protest, but her mother is already turning to the sink. This gesture is clearer than any words. The conversation is over, not up for discussion. Leah stands rooted to the spot. She feels a burning resentment rising from her stomach to her throat. Everyone will be there. Her entire class. And she's gone again. She's the eternal girl who's not allowed. She turns abruptly and goes into her room, leaving her mother alone in the kitchen. The bedroom door closes silently, with a soft but distinct click. Leah isn't crying. She clenches her fists and paces from the bed to the window and back. The same thoughts swirl in her head. It's unfair. They don't listen. They never listen. Her world suddenly seems like a cramped, stuffy box. The pink wallpaper, the bookshelf, the old teddy bear, it all looks like a prison set. She looks out the window. It's getting dark. There's the city, the lights, a whole life in which she's relegated to the role of nurse in this room. The anger doesn't go away. It grows colder and heavier, turning into a firm, immovable decision. Something needs to be broken, at least for one night. The clock shows 1:30 in the morning. The apartment is dark and completely quiet. Leah is no longer in her pajamas. She's dressed in dark jeans, a dark sweater, and sneakers. A small backpack stands by the bed. She approaches the window and slowly, trying not to make any noise, throws back the latch. The cold night air hits her face. Below the window is a wide branch of an old apple tree, and beyond that, the roof of a low garage. The escape route she watched the neighbor's cat take. Her heart is pounding somewhere in her temples. This is madness. She knows it. But the thought of going back to bed and resigning herself to it now seems even more unbearable. She throws her backpack over a branch. Then, taking a deep breath, she climbs out onto the windowsill. The tree creaks under the sudden weight, making her freeze. Nothing. No movement in her mother's room. She climbs down the branch, clinging to the rough bark with her hands until her feet find the solid surface of the garage. The jump down into the yard already seems like nothing. A minute later, she stands on the asphalt, the dark silhouette of her house behind her. She doesn't look back. The street is deserted, illuminated by the yellow spots of streetlights. She walks quickly, almost running for the first few minutes, until the adrenaline begins to subside. Then her pace slows. The cold creeps under her sweater. She shoves her hands in her pockets and simply walks, without a plan. She passes her schoolyard, dark and deserted, past the 24-hour store where the clerk dozes behind the counter. She crosses into the next neighborhood. The houses here are different, taller, older, with stucco. She's never been here on foot. Everything looks alien. The store signs, the pattern of the bars on the windows, even the smell. Not her street. The feeling of freedom that was present in the first minutes gradually dissolves in the night air. It is replaced by a different silence, not domestic, but vast, urban, indifferent. She is just a small dot in this sleeping city. There is nowhere else to go. She is tired. It is almost 3 o'clock. Leah finds a small park with a bench hunched under an old linden tree. She sits down, leans her backpack against the iron armrest, and looks at the dark windows of the house across the street. Now what? The thought rings in her head ever louder. The resentment and anger have vanished somewhere, leaving only immense fatigue and emptiness. She closes her eyes, simply to avoid looking at this strange street. The sound of an occasional car somewhere in the distance now seems to her not a symbol of freedom, but simply a lonely sound in a vast, cold world in which she has nowhere to go. Leah opens her eyes to the bright, cold sunlight hitting her face. She lies curled up on an iron bench, and for a few seconds, she can't figure out where she is. Then the memory returns. The night, the escape, the long walk. Her whole body aches, her back is stiff, and her mouth has an unpleasant, dry taste. She sits up, and for a second the world swims before her eyes. The morning in a strange neighborhood seems too loud and harsh. People walk past on their way to work. Mothers take their children to school. Cars drive by. No one looks at her. She's just another detail on the street. This feeling of loneliness makes her feel even colder, even though the sun is warm. Leah stands up and starts walking. Her legs move on their own, as if they want to carry her somewhere where she can hide from this daylight and prying eyes again. She feels empty and very tired. The anger has burned away overnight, leaving behind only the gray ashes of regret and confusion. What is she even doing here? Where should she go now? Returning home is shameful and scary. There's nowhere to go. She wanders, barely looking around. She walks one block, then another. Her feet carry her to a small park with stunted trees and a playground, now empty. In the center of the park stands a long wooden bench, almost hidden from the road by bushes. This place seems quiet and safe to her, a refuge. Leah plops down on a bench. Fatigue rolls over her in such a heavy wave that her eyelids close shut. She can't fight it anymore. She rests her head on her backpack, pulls her legs up, and within a few minutes, her deep, restless sleep is swallowed by the noise of the city. That same morning, a large black car glides down another street in the same neighborhood. A young man in a formal shirt and sunglasses sits behind the wheel. It's Chan, his assistant. Minho sits in the back seat, leaning back against the headrest. He looks tired but focused. An unopened pack of expensive cigarettes twirls between his fingers. He looks out the window, but his gaze is distracted. He's mentally replaying yesterday's difficult conversation and the upcoming errands. Mornings for him usually begin with such drives, quiet, quick, businesslike. "Turn into the park on 5th, Minho quietly tells the driver. "We'll drive through it. We need some air." The car turns smoothly off the main road and enters a quiet park. Minho watches the trees flash by outside the window, trying to clear his head. Then something catches his eye. On one of the benches, in the shade of the bushes, lies a curled-up object. At first, he thinks it's just a pile of rags or a discarded jacket. But on closer inspection, he makes out a sneaker and a strand of blonde hair. It's a person, a child. "Stop the car!" His voice sounds sharp and quiet at the same time. Chan immediately slows down and stops at the side of the road. Minho, without waiting for the driver to open the door for him, gets out of the car himself. He adjusts the sleeve of his jacket and slowly approaches the bench. Now he sees everything clearly. A girl is sleeping on the bench, about 13 or 14 years old. Her face is pale, and she frowns in her sleep. She is wearing nice clothes, clean jeans and a sweater, but she looks lost and very lonely. Next to her, instead of a pillow, is a stuffed backpack. This is not a homeless child. This is someone who ran away. Minho stands and stares at her silently for a few seconds. His own morning worries instantly fade into the background. Something akin to puzzlement flickers in his eyes, followed by a quick, cool assessment of the situation. He sees a problem, unplanned and fragile, that has fallen into his path. He turns and gestures to Chan, who has already exited the car and is standing a few steps away, carefully observing the surroundings. "Look around," Minho says quietly, not taking his eyes off the sleeping girl. There's no one looking like the parents looking for them. A lonely runaway girl at 7 in the morning in the park. This isn't a walk. Chan nods silently, his gaze sliding over the empty alleys. Minho looks at Leah again. He thinks for a moment. Leaving her here is out of the question. Waking her and letting her go isn't an option. In his world, inaction is often worse than any risk, especially when it comes to children on the street. He makes decisions quickly, as he always does. Minho stands over her, examining her pale, sleeping face. He sits down carefully, without making any sudden movements, on the edge of the bench, at a respectful distance, so as not to startle her with his sudden appearance. Then he says quietly but clearly, "Hey, wake up." Leah flinches and opens her eyes. The first thing she sees is a dark suit and an unfamiliar male face above her. She instantly retreats to the back of the bench, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She clutches the strap of her backpack, ready to run at any moment. Minho says. His voice is low, emotionless, but non-threatening. He makes no move to get closer. You're just sleeping in the park. Is everything okay? Leah is silent, trying to think. She glances at him, then briefly at the black car and the man standing nearby. Her heart is pounding. She nods, but it's a mechanical nod, meaningless. Are you from here? Minho asks, slowly looking around the square. Where are your parents? The question, like a stone, pierces her protective shell of fatigue and fear. Leah's lips twitch. She tries to nod again, but instead a quiet, strangled sound escapes her throat. She lowers her head and squeezes her eyelids to hold back the tears, but they still leak out, leaving dark drops on the knees of her jeans. I ran away, she finally breathes out, almost in a whisper. The words seem both stupid and enormous to her at the same time. Minho doesn't look surprised. He looks at her backpack, at her nice but wrinkled clothes, at the utter confusion and exhaustion on her face. It all fits. From home? He asks just as calmly. Leah nods again, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. For a long time? Today, or rather tonight. Minho tilts his head slightly, considering. He's not looking at her, but somewhere beyond her, his face unreadable. For him, the picture is crystal clear. A late-night escape, wandering the city, exhaustion. A dangerous situation for a child, one that could have ended far worse than sleeping on a park bench. So what now? He asks the next logical question. What are your plans? Leah shrugs, not looking up. She has no plans. All her resolve and rebellion vanished with the dawn, leaving only emptiness and fear. I don't know, she admits honestly. I just didn't want to go home. Minho remains silent for a few more seconds. He sees before him not a problem, but a child trapped in her own emotions. Leaving her here would be abandoning her to her fate, and his inner code, however strict, forbade that. Taking her to the police would create red tape and possibly exacerbate her conflict with her family. Both options were unacceptable. He makes decisions based on cold calculation and something else, deeply hidden. There's no point in sitting here, he says, standing up. You'll freeze or the wrong people will pick on you. Let's go. He says this not as an invitation, but as a statement of fact. Leah looks at him with a new wave of fear. Where to? Her voice trembled. With me. Minho takes a leisurely step back, giving her space. Eat, rest, come to your senses, and then we'll decide what to do. Sitting on a bench isn't the answer. He doesn't wait for her consent, turns, and walks slowly toward the car, confident she will follow. His calm and lack of pressure have a stronger effect on Leah than any persuasion. She lacks the strength to resist, argue, or run. She's alone, scared, and truly has no other choice. Slowly, as if in a dream, she lifts her backpack from the bench, rises to her stiff legs, and takes the first step, then another, following the stranger's dark figure toward the black car, which now seems like the only anchor in this strange morning. Leah freezes in place, her fingers digging into the strap of her backpack. The stranger's words sound like a death sentence. No, she blurts out quietly but firmly. She shakes her head, taking a step back. I'm not going to her, not for anything. Minho stops, turning to face her. He doesn't look angry, more like he's assessing and attentive. Do you realize you spent the night on the streets? What could have happened? I understand, Leah whispers. But I'm not coming back. She can't hear me. She doesn't care. She says this with such bitter conviction that Minho looks away for a second. He sees before him not just a stubborn child, but a person backed into a corner. He pauses, letting her calm down, while he quickly considers his options. Standing in the middle of the park and arguing with a frightened girl is pointless. There are essentially 3 options. Option 1. Take her home against her will. It's possible, of course. Pick her up, put her in the car, drive her to the front door, and ring the doorbell. But what will that accomplish? The The conflict won't be resolved. The girl, even more embittered, will run away again at the first opportunity. And he'll have a history of forcibly holding a minor. Extra eyes, extra questions. No, that's stupid and dangerous. Option 2. Call the police or child protection services. Technically, it's the right thing to do. But Minho winces inwardly. There are papers, reports, endless questioning. His name, his presence in this story will be recorded. For someone in his circle, any official attention is like a bright spotlight in a dark room. He doesn't like it. Besides, he looks at Leah, frightened, trembling. Sending her into institutional custody, even temporarily, would mean breaking her completely. Not an option. Option 3 arises almost automatically, as the only logical way out of the current impasse. Take control of the situation yourself. He looks at Leah again. She doesn't look like a street kid. Her clothes are expensive, if wrinkled, and her backpack is good. This isn't an escape from poverty or violence. It's an escape from hurt feelings, from misunderstanding, from the feeling of being unheard. The police don't deal with things like that. What's needed here is a diplomat, or in his case, a tactician. Minho has always been used to assessing risks and taking responsibility. He's facing a living, breathing risk right now. Leaving her is risking something bad happening to her. Taking her back by force is risking unpredictable consequences. Taking her back, yes, that's a risk too, but it's a manageable risk. He has a safe, secure place to live. He has people who can discreetly find out everything about her family. He can provide her with food and shelter for a couple of days, give her time to cool off, and give her mother time to process the situation. It's like a temporary truce. His gaze hardens. He's not making his decision out of kindness. He's not sentimental. He's acting out of cold calculation, out of the understanding that this is the cleanest, most manageable path in a messy situation. And perhaps out of something else, something deeply hidden, some long-forgotten memory of his own helplessness. He takes a step towards the car, not towards the passenger door, but slightly to the side, opening up space for her. Okay, he says calmly. We won't go to Mom's, right now. Leah looks at him with disbelief, but also with a glimmer of hope. Where then? I have a house. You can spend the night there. One room, yours. No one will bother you. You can eat, sleep in a normal bed, and think. In the meantime, I'll find out what's going on with your mother, without noise, without the police. He says this in a businesslike tone, as if proposing a deal, and there's a strange comfort in it. He's not promising that everything will be fine. He's offering a temporary solution and a clear plan. And then? Leah asks, still hesitant to move. We'll see later. Maybe you'll want to call yourself. Maybe your mother won't be so categorical anymore. But sitting here isn't an option. Going wherever your eyes take you, even less so. Would you agree to temporary shelter? Leah hesitates. Every cell in her body screams danger. Getting into a car with a stranger, going to his house. But her legs ache with fatigue. Her stomach clenches with hunger. And the thought of spending another hour in this cold, unfamiliar park is even more terrifying. This man speaks strangely, but honestly. He doesn't make empty promises, and she truly has no other choice. She nods slowly, almost weightlessly. Yes, she says quietly. I agree. Okay. Minho nods briefly in response, as if he'd just sealed an important contract. Get in the car. It's warm. He opens the back door and steps back, making room for her. Overcoming the last vestiges of fear, Leah takes a step, then another, and slides onto the soft leather back. The door closes with a dull, reliable click. The world outside, the park, the morning, her escape, remains behind the tinted glass. Inside, it's quiet, smelling of leather and some expensive woodsy scent. Minho gets in next to the driver without turning around. Let's go home, he says to Chan. The car starts moving smoothly. Leah presses her forehead against the cold glass and watches the park recede. And then the entire unfamiliar neighborhood. She doesn't know what awaits her ahead. But now, in this quiet, warm car, rolling along the morning streets, she feels not fear, but a deafening, all-consuming fatigue. And a quiet, trembling relief that, at least for a while, She no longer has to go anywhere or decide anything. The car didn't drive for long, maybe 20 minutes. But for Leah, the time stretched into a strange, sleepy eternity. She barely looked out the window, her forehead resting against the cool glass. Fatigue finally overwhelmed her, turning fear into apathy. She only vaguely noticed that the houses outside were growing larger and smaller, and the trees more numerous. The car finally turned off the asphalt road onto a neat gravel driveway and stopped in front of a large, modern house. The house wasn't an ostentatious palace, but rather a massive, minimalist structure of dark wood and glass that looked like it belonged in the surrounding forest. Everything was very quiet and empty. Minho stepped out first and opened the door for Leah. She staggered out and looked around. The place was beautiful, but deserted, and slightly eerie in its tranquility. Not a soul, only the sound of birdsong. Minho said, heading for the massive dark wood front door. Leah trailed behind him. Inside, the house was just as spacious and minimalist. High ceilings, panoramic windows, streaming light, polished concrete floors, and a few expensive but austere pieces of furniture. Nothing superfluous, no photographs, knickknacks, or traces of someone's constant presence. The house resembled a very expensive, sterile hotel. Minho took off his jacket and tossed it over the back of one of the sofas. "Chan," he said to the assistant who followed him in. "Food. Something simple that can be heated up. And tea. Take it upstairs." The assistant nodded silently and disappeared in a direction that probably led to the kitchen. Minho turned to Leah, who stood in the middle of the vast living room, huddled, holding her backpack in front of her like a shield. "You'll be here temporarily," he said, his voice echoing faintly in the empty space. "While you're here, there are rules. You follow them." He began listing, looking at her directly and without a smile. "First, don't leave the house without me or Chan. Second, don't touch the phone on the desk in the office or the computers. Third, don't go into rooms with closed doors. Fourth, if people come, stay upstairs until you're called. Is that clear?" Leah nodded, overwhelmed by the house's size and its cold, businesslike atmosphere. It was not the refuge she had imagined. "Okay." Minho turned and walked toward the dark wooden stairs. "Come on, I'll show you where you'll sleep." He led her up the wide staircase to the second floor. The hallway upstairs was long and quiet, with several closed doors. Minho stopped at one at the end, opened it, and stepped aside, letting Leah through. The room was normal, completely different from the rest of the house. Small, cozy, light-colored walls, a wooden floor covered with a soft carpet, a plain bed with a dark blue bedspread, a desk by the window, and a door that apparently led to a small private bathroom. A lamp sat on the desk, and a stack of fresh towels lay on the bed. The room smelled of clean linens and wood. It was a guest room, impersonal but safe. Minho said, remaining in the doorway. "The bathroom is there. The towels are clean. Chan will bring food. Toiletries, if you need anything, are in the bathroom cabinet. The window opens, but it has an alarm. Don't try your escape trick again." Leah stepped inside and placed her backpack on the floor. She looked around. After the park and the cold car, this quiet, warm room felt like paradise. "Thank you," she breathed out quietly, still not daring to look him in the eyes. Minho nodded slightly. "Rest. Food will be here in 20 minutes. After you eat, sleep as much as you like. We'll talk later when you're able to think." He was about to close the door, but paused for a second. "And Leah," his voice grew a little quieter, "as long as you're here, nothing will happen to you. I guarantee that." He didn't wait for an answer. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Leah alone in the complete silence of the room. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no sounds from the house. Absolute silence. She slowly approached the bed and sat on the edge. The bedspread was soft and cool. She ran her hand over the fabric, trying to comprehend where she was and what was happening. Just a few hours ago, she had been sleeping on an iron bench in the park, and now she was sitting in a clean, warm room in an unfamiliar, huge house belonging to a stern and intimidating man who spoke to her like a boss, but who had fed and sheltered her. Her body, finally relaxed, demanded its release. Her eyes began to close. She kicked off her sneakers without undressing, climbed under the cool covers, and buried her face in the pillow. Her last thought before sleep consumed her completely was that the strange man outside had told her that nothing would happen to her. And somehow, against all common sense, she believed him. Then came the dark, dreamless emptiness of long-awaited sleep. Minho closed the door to the girl's room behind him and walked into his office, an austere space with a massive desk and a single large window overlooking the forest. He sat down in the chair, gazed for a few seconds at the featureless landscape beyond the glass, and then dialed Chan, who was on the floor below. Minho said without preamble as soon as the assistant picked up the phone. "A girl, Leah. I don't know her last name. Lives somewhere in the Central District, ran away last night. Mother, Hyeon, apparently works alone. Find an address, anything you can, carefully, without making any unnecessary noise." "Got it," Chan replied briefly. "It'll be there by evening." Minho hung up. The case was set in motion. Now it was time. Leah slept for several hours, deeply and deeply. When she opened her eyes, the room was bathed in soft daylight. On the nightstand next to her bed sat a tray, a plate with a plastic-wrapped bun, cheese, and sliced apples, a thermos of still warm tea, and a bottle of water. She sat up and ate everything slowly, feeling her strength gradually returning. Now, less exhausted, she began to look around. The room was quiet and too clean, as if no one had ever used it. She felt a little uneasy. She stood up, went to the door, and listened. Silence. Carefully opening the door, she poked her head into the hallway. No one was there. She stepped out and walked slowly, glancing out of the corner of her eye at the half-open doors. One led to an equally empty room, the other to a spacious, sparkling bathroom with a huge bathtub. It seemed there was no one else on the second floor except her. She descended the stairs. The first floor greeted her with the same silence. The living room, with its high ceilings and panoramic windows, seemed lifeless, like a page from an interior design magazine. Not a single personal item, not a book left on the table, not a jacket casually thrown on the sofa. In the huge kitchen of steel and dark wood, everything gleamed and stood in its place. Leah walked through the dining room, peered into an empty room that could have been a study. Everything was impeccable, expensive, and completely uninhabited. This house wasn't anyone's home. It was a fortress, or a very beautiful prison. She felt sad and lonely. Her own room with posters and books now seemed such a warm, living place compared to this cold perfection. Minho was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing a simple dark t-shirt and sweatpants, but his posture and gaze still exuded undeniable authority. "Are you inspecting the property?" he asked. There was neither mockery nor approval in his voice. It was a statement of fact. Leah nodded, looking down in embarrassment. "Everything is very clean." "Yes," he agreed. "People are rare here. Would you like some tea?" He didn't wait for an answer, turned, and headed for the kettle. Leah, after a brief hesitation, followed him and sat down on a high bar stool near the kitchen island. Minho placed a cup of green tea in front of her and sat down opposite her. He looked at her silently for a few seconds while she warmed her hands on the hot porcelain. "You're rested. Now you can speak clearly," he began. "Tell me about Mom. What happened?" The question hit her like a blow. Leah's insides sank. She stared into her cup. "Nothing happened," she muttered. "Girls don't run away from home over nothing," Minho retorted calmly. "You had a fight." "About what?" Leah shrugged, wanting him to leave her alone. She was ashamed to admit to a stranger her childish resentment, as she now felt. "It's just, she always forbids everything, never any normal things. More specifically, I wanted to stay the night at a friend's. For her birthday, everyone would have gone, but she forbade it, as always, and she wouldn't even listen." Leah's voice wavered, but there were no tears anymore, only a tired bitterness. Minho nodded, as if he'd gotten the answer he'd been expecting. "And you decided that running away was the answer?" "I don't know," Leah said quietly. "I just couldn't stand being there anymore." "Can you do it now?" he asked. After the night in the park? The question caught her off guard. She remained silent. The truth was, the thought of going back scared her just as much, if not more, than it had then. But she didn't want to stay here, in this icy, perfect house either. "She's your mother," Minho continued, his tone even, neither judgmental nor pitiful. "She's responsible for you. Her job is to say no sometimes, even if you don't like it." "She doesn't just say no," Leah blurted out, finally looking up at him. The old flame of resentment flared in them. "She never explains. She never listens. To her, I'll always be a little girl who can't decide for herself what's okay and what's not." "And you are a girl," Minho stated mercilessly. "A 14-year-old who ran away from home and fell asleep in the park because no one bought him ice cream." "This isn't ice cream!" Leah almost screamed, feeling the indignation of misunderstanding wash over her again. "This is my life. My friends." "Friends," Minho repeated, and for the first time, a slight, barely perceptible weariness crept into his voice. "And there are more important than your safety? More important than your mother, who I'm sure is tearing her hair out with worry right now?" Leah lowered her head again. She hated it when adults reduced everything to this safety, as if the whole world consisted of dangers, and they were the only ones who understood it. "She's not worried," she muttered stubbornly into her cup. "She doesn't care." Minho leaned back in his chair and sighed. He saw that the wall of alienation and stubbornness was still too high. The girl was tired, scared, and deeply hurt. Breaking through that wall now was pointless. "Okay," he said, standing up. "Think what you want, but know this. I found information about your mother. She works 2 jobs to pay for your studies and your normal things, and now she's panicking because her daughter is missing. These are the facts." He left the words hanging in the air and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Leah alone with her tea and a swell of conflicting emotions. Anger at her mother, shame for her actions, fear of the future, and a strange, crushing sense of guilt from the stranger's words. All of it tangled inside her into one heavy, insoluble tangle. She didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want anything at all. The day passes in the strange, ghostly silence of Minho's house. Leah hardly leaves her room. She listens to music on headphones, looks out the window at the forest that begins just beyond the property line, and occasionally steals into the kitchen to get water or an apple. One day she meets Chan in the hallway, who nods silently and passes by, carrying a stack of white envelopes. The food appears of its own accord. It's left on a tray by the door of her room. Everything happens wordlessly, like in a hotel with ghost service. Leah feels invisible, and this simultaneously frightens and calms her. No one asks questions. No one demands explanations, just silence and the safety of the walls. That evening, Minho is sitting in his office. On his laptop screen is a brief but comprehensive profile sent by Chan. Hyeyeon, 38, works as a senior nurse in a clinic's day hospital and works part-time doing medical paperwork at home. She has been divorced for 5 years. Child support payments from her ex-husband are irregular. She lives with her daughter in a 3-room apartment in a 9-story panel building in the very same neighborhood Leah fled. Her credit history is clean, but she has outstanding utility bills. She has no criminal connections or previous legal troubles. She's an ordinary woman who works long hours and, by all appearances, has little free time. Under last known activity, it says, "A police report has been filed for the disappearance of her minor daughter. She is actively calling hospitals and the child's friends." Minho leans back in his chair. The picture is clear. Not poverty, not violence. Fatigue, pressure, misunderstanding. Classic. He dials Hyoyeon's number, listed in the file. The phone rings on the 3rd ring. A woman's voice, hoarse with worry and sleeplessness, breathes into the receiver. "Hello? Leah? My name is Minho," he says evenly, without preamble. "Your daughter, Leah, is with me now. She's safe." On the other end of the line, there's a sharp intake of breath, then a muffled sound, somewhere between a groan and a scream. "What? Who are you? What did you do to her? Where is she?" The words fly out like a machine gun, the voice breaking into hysteria. "She's fine." Minho repeats, his voice low and hard, like the rock that the wave of panic crashes against. She's not hurt. She's not sick. She's sleeping in a normal bed. She's been fed. I repeat, she's completely safe. Give her to me, now! I'll call the police. Hyeon's voice trembled, and tears could be heard in it. Minho states calmly, and that's the right thing to do. But yelling and threatening won't help. Calm down and listen. His tone, devoid of emotion but carrying unquestionable authority, disarms the woman for a moment. She can be heard gasping for air on the other end of the line. Who are you? She finally exhales, more quietly, but with the same chilling anguish. What do you want? Money? I don't need anything from you, Minho says. I found your daughter sleeping on a park bench in the Cheongdam area. She ran away from home. I offered her temporary shelter so she wouldn't wander the streets, that's all. Why did she believe you? Why didn't she call me? Hyeon's voice once again brims with hurt and pain. Because she's upset with you, deeply. And she's too tired to call. She's not ready to talk right now. I have to talk to her, immediately. Panic begins to build again. No. His words sounded like a steel door slamming shut in the face of her demand. Not now. Right now, both of you, you and she, are in no condition to have a constructive conversation. You're hysterical. She's defensive. You'll only ruin everything. But I'm her mother. I have the right. Your right now is to ensure her safety, Minho retorts coldly. And her safety right now means giving her time to recover. She won't escape from me. There's security here and a high fence. She'd be in real danger outside. Do you understand that? Hyeon's ragged breathing. What do you want? She finally asked, a hint of devastated submission creeping into her voice. I want you to calm down. Drink some water. Drop the police report. Say your daughter was found with a distant relative. That it was all a misunderstanding. I'll give you some time. A day, 2 at most. During that time, I'll try to prepare her for the conversation. And you'll think about what you'll say to her, other than yelling and blaming her. What if you harm her? Hyun's voice grew thin again with fear. If I meant harm, Minho said, a slight chilling weariness in his voice, I wouldn't have called you. You would have found her in the park yourself, in a few days, or you wouldn't have found her at all. Choose. Trust me now, or lose her forever. These words hung in the silence, a cruel but absolutely precise calculation. Okay, Hyeon whispered, and there was a surrender in that whisper. 2 days, but how will I know she's okay? I'll call you again tomorrow at the same time, briefly, without details, just to let you know she's alive and well. That's the best you can hope for right now. He didn't say goodbye. He simply hung up. The call was over. He'd accomplished his task, informed his mother, eliminated the threat to the police, and taken a break. Now everything depended on the girl behind the wall and whether he could reach her. He looked at the closed door of his office, beyond which lay the silence of the vast, empty house. There was still one more difficult part of the job ahead. A week passes. The days in Minho's house follow a strict, quiet routine. Leah wakes up late. Breakfast is always waiting on a tray by the door. She eats, then spends a long time gazing out her window at the pine trees. Sometimes she ventures beyond her room. She explores the house like a museum, quietly, tiptoeing, barely breathing. She's learned that in the living room, the midday sun falls in a perfect rectangle on the floor at exactly 1 o'clock. That one of the faucets in the kitchen drips slightly, emitting a quiet, rhythmic sound. That the library, which she visited once, smells of old paper and dust, and the books there are arranged by the color of their spines, not alphabetically. Her world has shrunk to the size of this house, but within its confines she feels a strange safety. No one is yelling, no one is demanding she put away her things or do her homework immediately. The silence, which had initially been oppressive, has now become enveloping. She's beginning to discern its nuances. The silence of an empty house, the silence when Minho is working somewhere in the study, and the wary silence when Chan or other unfamiliar men in black cars arrive. She's learned to recognize them by the sound of their engines and not leave the room during these times. One afternoon, Minho shows up at her door without knocking. He's just standing there, holding several shopping bags from upscale stores. Get up. You need some proper clothes to change into, he says, placing the bags on the bed. Leah, embarrassed, approaches and peers inside. Nothing bright or youthful. Simple, quality items. Dark jeans, a few neutral-colored t-shirts and sweatshirts, new underwear in packages, socks, simple sneakers a size too big for her. Everything feels very expensive and completely impersonal. Thank you, she mumbles. It's not a gift, he corrects her, his voice still devoid of warmth. It's a necessity. You can't wear the same thing for a week. Wash it and put something on. He leaves, leaving her to unpack her groceries. No questions about what she likes, no compliments. Simply the solution to a need, like ordering water or food. And yet, there's a certain care in this dry practicality. He noticed she didn't have any clothes. He bought them. The quality is impeccable, the sizes precisely chosen. It's attentiveness, but the attentiveness of a commander to his soldier, not a father to his daughter. He speaks to her little and only to the point. Eat. Don't go out into the garden tonight. Breakfast at 9. His requests are always clear, his instructions brooking no discussion. Sometimes she catches his searching gaze when they accidentally meet in the kitchen. It's as if he's assessing her condition, like a doctor assessing a patient. And always, always, the unspoken question hangs between them. When will you be ready to talk? And so, after a week of this silent coexistence, it happens. It's evening. Leah is sitting at the kitchen island, eating the noodles Chan brought. Minho is drinking coffee, standing by the window, looking out into the darkness of the garden. The house is quiet, only the refrigerator hums. Mom, is very tired, Leah says suddenly, without looking up from her plate. The words come out quietly, as if she's surprised she even said them out loud. Minho turns slowly, leaning his back against the counter. He doesn't interrupt. She comes home late, Leah continues, picking at her noodles with her chopsticks, and she always has a headache. And whenever I ask her anything, she immediately says no, because she doesn't have the energy to argue. It's easier to just forbid it. She pauses, as if checking to see if he's listening. He just stands there, waiting. I know she works a lot. Leah's voice grows even quieter. I know it's for me, but I think she's just forgotten what it's like to be me. She thinks that if I don't go to the sleepover, nothing will happen. But for me, it's the world. All their jokes, all the conversations that I'll never know about. I'll be the odd one out. She falls silent, and in the silence of the kitchen, her confession seems enormous. Did you tell her that? Minho asks calmly. She wouldn't listen. Have you tried not yelling, but saying it like this? Leah shrugs. She'd still say I don't understand how hard it is to make money, that I'm selfish. Maybe, Minho agrees. Do you consider yourself selfish? This direct question makes her finally look up at him. I don't know, I ran away. I made her worry. It's bad. Yes, it is bad, he agrees ruthlessly. But that doesn't make you a monster. It makes you a teenager who couldn't find another way to get through to her. He moves away from the window and pours himself more coffee. The world isn't divided into right and wrong, Leah. Your mother is tired and afraid for you. You feel caged and alone. Both of those feelings are real. The problem is, you've stopped speaking the same language. You scream for freedom, but she hears only threats. She talks about safety, but you hear only prohibition. Leah listens, her eyes wide. No one has ever laid it all out so simply for her. What should we do? She blurts out. For starters, stop considering each other enemies. You escaped. It was your action, and you'll have to answer for it. But it's also a signal to her, a very loud one. Maybe now she'll hear it. He puts the cup in the sink. Tomorrow I'll call her and arrange a meeting. Not so you can be taken away right away, for a conversation. Here, on neutral territory. Are you ready to see her? Fear grips Leah's throat. She imagines her mother's face, her anger, her tears, her disappointment. I'm afraid, she admits honestly. It's normal, Minho nods. It's normal to be afraid, but you can't hide here forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to leave this room and enter the real world. It's better to do it now while you have a mediator. He doesn't call himself a friend or a protector. He's a mediator, as neutral and stern as the walls of this house. And somehow, in this role, he can be trusted. Okay, Leah says quietly. Tomorrow. Minho nods briefly, and something in his gaze flickers that could be taken as approval. Not praise, but acknowledgement that she's made a difficult, mature choice. He leaves the kitchen, leaving her alone with her half-eaten noodles and a new, unsettling, but no longer so hopeless feeling. The wall of silence has shown its first crack. More than 10 days had passed. Leah had gotten used to the schedule, the silence, the way the light fell through the windows at different times of day. She even began to recognize some of the books in Minho's library, even though he had forbidden her to go there. But it was obvious how bored she was. She never said it directly, but Minho noticed how she froze when she heard children's laughter or a song that was apparently popular at her school on the TV in the living room. Chan sometimes turned it on. How she mechanically stroked the soft fabric of the new sweater he had bought her. But there was something distant in her gaze at this expensive thing, not joy. How he once caught her in the kitchen, staring at the screen of her switched-off phone. She hadn't tried to turn it on. The battery had died that first night. She simply stared at the dark rectangle, and her face at that moment was not sullenly adolescent, but childishly lost. She missed her life, her messy table, the smell of her mother's soup, which she had grown tired of, the school bell, and most of all, her mother. But admitting this, even to herself, was tantamount to defeat. So her escape had been a mistake. So her mother was right, and it was unbearable. At the beginning of the second week, Minho decided to take action. The conversation over dinner was straightforward. "I'll call your mother tomorrow and arrange a time for her to come," he said, pushing his plate away. "You need to pack your things." Leah, who had just been eating ice cream, Chan had also brought it, and it was the first sweet treat in days, froze with a spoon to her mouth. "Come? Here?" "No, she's coming to pick you up. You're going home." Leah's face immediately became closed and stony. "No," she said firmly. "No is not an option," Minho replied, his voice even, but with a steely edge she'd never heard before. "You can't live here forever. This is a temporary shelter, not a new home." "Why not?" Her voice was defiant. "It's nice here. It's quiet. No one bothers me." "This isn't life, Leah. This is suspended animation. You're hiding." "I'm not hiding. I'm better here." She raised her voice, putting down her ice cream. "Mom never has time. She's always tired and angry. And here, it's peaceful." "It's empty," he corrected sharply. "And you know it. You miss your stupid chaos, your silly friends, and even her constant lectures. You're just afraid to admit you made a mistake." His words hit the mark. Leah blushed, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt. "I didn't make a mistake. It's her own fault. And I'm not going. You can't force me." "I can't," Minho agreed, his sudden calm more terrifying than his scream. "Physically, I can, but I won't. Because then it won't solve anything. You'll run away again at the first opportunity, but I won't let you stay. You're not a child I have to raise. Your place is with your family, even if that family is just a tired woman who doesn't know how to get through to her daughter." He got up from the table. "Think about it until tomorrow. If you refuse, I'll simply stop being your buffer. I'll call my mother and give her the address. And then, sort it out yourselves. I'm leaving." He walked away, leaving her alone. His ultimatum hung in the air, cold and undeniable. The next day, Leah was gloomy. When Minho asked her about her decision at breakfast, she silently shook her head, staring at her plate. "I'm fine here," she repeated stubbornly, but there was no longer any confidence in her voice, only a childish, desperate capriciousness. Minho watched her all day. He saw her wander aimlessly around the house, touching objects but not picking them up. Her gaze returning again and again to the window, which didn't reveal her street. She clung to the artificial safety of his home because she was afraid of facing the consequences of her actions in the real world. She feared her mother's anger, her mother's tears, her mother's disappointment. Direct reassurances crashed against this wall of fear. And then Minho realized he couldn't force her. He couldn't convince her. He needed to make her want to leave. He needed to shatter his illusion of a good life and make her see that her place wasn't here. He needed to show her that his world wasn't a safe haven, but a different cage. More comfortable, but no less strong. That evening, he called Chan into his office. They spoke briefly. Minho gave clear, concise instructions. "Starting tomorrow," he said, "everything changes. We're creating a regime for her. Strict, harsh, like in the barracks. No leniency." He made a plan. Everything that made her stay here bearable would disappear. Scheduled meals, the simplest, no sweets from Chan. A ban on leaving her room except for supervised excursions. Wi-Fi would be turned off in her part of the house. It was already only in his office, but she didn't know that. His cold, distant manner, she was to feel not like a guest, but unwanted, a burden living by someone else's strict rules. It was a cruel game, but Minho saw it as the only way. He couldn't allow her to use his home as a permanent refuge from her problems. She had to face a choice. Either an endless, dreary, regimented life in a gilded cage with a cold, strange man, or return to her complex but familiar world, where there are quarrels but also love, where there are taboos but also the opportunity to discuss them. The next day, the ruse was put into action. When Leah, as usual, arrived in the kitchen later than usual, hoping to find her breakfast, the table was empty. On the counter lay a note from Chan, written in a neat hand. "Breakfast is served from 8 o'clock to 8:30. Lunch is at 1 o'clock. Dinner is at 7 o'clock. Being late means missing a meal." Minho in the doorway. He wasn't looking at her like before, not with a neutral, assessing gaze, but with a cold, indifferent one. "The rules are getting stricter," he said simply. "Free time is over. Your room and the dining hall are on schedule. Everything else is off limits. Disobey. There will be consequences." He turned and left. Leah was left standing in the middle of the sparkling, clean, and empty kitchen, feeling for the first time in days the walls of this beautiful house truly close in around her. This was the beginning of the end of her illusion. Minho's plan was as simple and cruel as a surgical incision. He didn't need to kick Leah out, but rather make her want to run away, so that his home would cease to be a refuge and become a place to flee from. He gave Chan instructions, and then began playing his part. The next day, a new reality began. Leah woke to a sharp knock on the door. "Wake up! Breakfast in 15 minutes!" Chan's voice rang out, devoid of its usual neutrality. It carried a command. When she emerged into the kitchen, sleepy and rumpled, what awaited her wasn't her usual plate of something delicious, but plain oatmeal, a glass of water, and an apple. Minho was already sitting at the table with a newspaper. He didn't look at her or say, "Good morning." "Eat quickly. Your room is being cleaned at 9. Bed, dust, floor. Chan will check," he said, without looking up from his text. Leah sat up slowly, stunned. "But I don't know where the rags, the vacuum cleaner." "You'll find out. Chan has a to-do list for the day. After cleaning, an hour in the library. No phone, no music. Read whatever they give you." "And what will they give you?" she asked, and the first crack appeared in her voice. "Whatever I decide," Minho snapped, and folded the newspaper. "The rules have changed, Leah. You thought this was a hotel? This is not a hotel. People live by a schedule here. If you want to stay, get used to it." From that moment on, his demeanor became icy. He stopped speaking to her, except to give orders. Their occasional encounters in the hallway now ended with a cold, assessing glance and a phrase like, "You shouldn't be wandering around here. Go back to your room." He even drank tea alone now, in his office with the door closed. Chan became her enforcer. He showed up precisely at the appointed time, measuring out her walk through the locked garden, exactly 20 minutes of silent pacing along the path under his watchful eye. He brought food on schedule, plain rice with vegetables, steamed chicken breast, kefir, no sweets, none of the delicacies that had appeared earlier. When Leah once tried to protest, saying she wasn't hungry at 7 in the evening, Chan simply took her plate away. "Next meal is tomorrow at 8 in the morning, he announced and left. Leah felt like she was in a maximum security prison. Beautiful, expensive, but still a prison. The very peace she valued had turned into an oppressive, regimented silence. Her room, instead of a refuge, had become a cell. She was bored, lonely, and uncomfortable. Terribly uncomfortable. Before, the silence had been neutral. Now it was hostile. Every step outside her room felt like a violation. She caught Minho's gaze on her, blank, indifferent, and she wanted to sink into the ground. She began to understand that she only felt good when there were some, even ghostly, signs of freedom and indulgence here. When they were removed, the harsh truth was revealed. This was not her home. Here, she was unwanted cargo. After 3 days of this regime, her eyes no longer showed resentment, but suppressed panic and melancholy. She followed all the rules mechanically, her shoulders hunched. She stole glances at the front door, huge and massive, always locked. The thought of simply walking out and leaving became obsessive. But fear, pride, and some lingering hope that everything could return to normal held her back. Minho saw it. The trick was working. It was time for the final act. On the evening of the 5th day of the new regime, he staged a small performance. A business partner arrived, one of his men, playing the role of an angry creditor. They spoke loudly in raised tones in the office, deliberately leaving the door ajar. Leah, sitting in her room, heard snatches of phrases. Too many problems. Strangers in the house. A danger to us all. We need to get rid of. Then came the sound of a fist slamming on a table and harsh cursing. Leah cringed. She felt truly afraid. She imagined what this evil man might do to her if Minho got rid of this burden. An hour later, the guest left, slamming the front door. A deathly silence fell over the house. Late that night, Leah heard footsteps. Minho emerged from the study, his face haggard and gray in the light of the nightlight. He passed her room without even glancing at the door, went downstairs, and judging by the sounds, began gathering up some papers in the living room, roughly slamming drawers. That's when he made his mistake. He allegedly received an urgent call requiring his immediate presence on site. Leah heard him shout at Chan to start the car, and then hurried steps toward the exit. There was the sound of the front door opening and not closing completely. As if in a rush, he simply yanked it toward himself, but the lock didn't engage. There was a complete, ringing silence. Leah sat on the bed, holding her breath. She waited for 15 minutes. Not a sound, not a footstep, not a voice. Her heart was beating so loudly, it echoed in her temples. She crept out into the hallway. The dark, empty house seemed like a huge black maw. She descended the stairs, afraid that each step would howl beneath her feet. The living room was empty, only a single lamp burning on the table, illuminating a mess of scattered papers, evidence of recent anger and haste. And then she saw it. The front door was ajar. A strip of streetlight from a street lamp beyond the fence was visible through the crack, and the cold night air could be felt. It was a trap, rigged with ingenious simplicity. Not escape was forbidden, but a stolen opportunity that had fallen at her feet in a moment of crisis. The fear of being rid of it, the cold of the last few days, the longing for something familiar, all were mixed together. At that moment, returning to her room and waiting for them to deal with her was more terrifying than stepping through that crack and running away. She didn't hesitate. She tiptoed to the door, carefully pulled the heavy canvas back, slipped outside, and ran down the dark gravel path to the gate, which, miraculously, was also slightly open. Another accident in her haste to leave. She burst out onto the deserted country road and ran away without looking back, feeling the gravel give way to hard asphalt under her feet. A mixture of panic, relief, and bitter, lonely triumph tearing through her chest. She'd done it. She'd escaped, on her own. She didn't notice how a dark car with tinted windows smoothly pulled out from around the corner of the garage and pulled away behind her, keeping its distance. Chan was behind the wheel, and in the back seat, watching her figure flicker in the light of the streetlights, sat Minho. His face was unreadable. The trick had worked. Now he needed to make sure she got to where they were waiting for her, home. Leah slipped out the half-open door, and the cold night air stung her face, flushed with excitement. She didn't run immediately, but pressed her back against the rough stone wall of the house for a few seconds, peering into the darkness. The granite gravel of the driveway crunched beneath her sneakers, and every sound seemed impossibly loud. The gate leading onto the deserted country road was indeed not fully closed. A black gap of freedom gaped between the doors. At that moment, the fear of being caught, by Chan, by Minho returning, by that angry man from the office, overcame everything. She lunged forward, pushed the heavy metal door open, dashed through, and ran along the edge of the road, disappearing into the darkness, away from the illuminated entrance. The backpack, filled with the things Minho had bought, she had hastily stuffed everything in sight into it, mercilessly hit her back. She ran until her side began to ache, and her breathing became ragged and wheezy. Only then did she stop, resting her hands on her knees, and look back. Minho's house had long since disappeared around the bend and into the trees, leaving only the dim glow of streetlights somewhere in the distance. A strange feeling washed over her, a sharp, dizzying relief, mixed with a new, street-level helplessness. She was alone. Again. But this time she had run away of her own free will. It gave her strength. She walked quickly, turning off the main road onto a narrower one that, as she remembered from the day of her arrival, led toward the city. The night was quiet, with occasional cars flashing past, their headlights flooding the asphalt. Leah hugged the side of the road, trying to stay in the shadows. She didn't know that 100 meters behind her, headlights off, a dark SUV was driving along the same road. Chan was behind the wheel, his face impassive in the dashboard light. He kept a steady distance, using not only his vision, but also the weak signal from a tiny beacon carefully sewn into the lining of Minho's new backpack, in case the girl decided to stray from the expected route. Minho, sitting in the passenger seat, stared silently out the side window. He didn't comment, didn't give any instructions. He simply observed. His plan was entering its final phase, and now everything depended on Leah and her mother. Leah walked, and as the physical fatigue from running subsided, thoughts began to creep into her head. At first, they were fragmentary, connected with danger. What if I'm being followed? What if that man from the office? She glanced around, but saw nothing but the dark silhouettes of trees and the occasional lights in distant houses. Gradually, the fear of being chased began to dull, giving way to other feelings. She recalled Minho's icy gaze at breakfast, the strict rules, the tasteless food, scheduled according to schedule, the oppressive silence, which ceased to be neutral and became prison-like. She felt uneasy, bitter, and hurt. Why had everything changed so much? Why had he become like this? Maybe she really was a burden to him, just like the man he'd shouted? This thought hurt the most. She felt like a foolish, naive girl who believed she'd found a safe haven. But it turned out to be just another trap, albeit a gilded one. Minho's house, but from her own. Her mother, who mended a torn button on her school uniform late at night, dozing over her needle. Her mother who left a note on the table saying, "Soup in the fridge, heat it up," before her night shift. Even their argument in the kitchen, her mother's tired but firm face. Before, Leah had seen this only as an unfair prohibition. Now, after Minho's icy indifference, a strange tinge of care appeared in this memory. No, that's not it. Responsibility. Yes, her mother felt responsible for her, even if it was expressed in stupid, hateful prohibitions. As she walked, the city lights ahead grew brighter. The first signs of her home neighborhood appeared. A familiar supermarket with its dim sign, a bus stop with a graffiti-covered bench. Leah slowed. Her heart began pounding again, but this time not from fear of being chased, but from fear of what lay ahead. How would she find her mother? In tears? Furious? Or would she not be home at all? Would she have to search all over the city for her? Chan's SUV stopped in the shadow of a high-rise building 2 blocks from her house. Minho watched silently as the small figure with the backpack slowed, almost stopped, then trudged forward again, but less confidently. "That's enough," Minho said quietly. "She's on familiar territory. From here, she's on her own." Chan nodded. Their job was almost done. They had to make sure she didn't take another turn or get into trouble along the way. Now all they had to do was wait. Leah approached her house. Their kitchen window was dark. Her bedroom window was too. A light was on in the entryway. She stood, clutching the straps of her backpack, hesitating to enter. The feeling that had driven her away from Minho's house, the desire to escape the cold, alien severity, was now confronted with shame and fear. What would she say? I ran away, lived with a stranger, and now I'm back? She took a deep, trembling breath and pulled the front door open. The creaking of the familiar spring sounded louder than any chime. She began to slowly climb the stairs. Each step echoed in the quiet entryway. She recalled how easily and quickly she had run downstairs just, what was it, 2 weeks ago? It felt like a lifetime ago. She stopped in front of her door. Her hand instinctively reached for her pocket, but the key, of course, was gone. It was still there, on her nightstand, in her past life. She should have called, just pressed the doorbell, but her finger wouldn't obey. Footsteps were heard outside the door. Not quick, not anxious, slow, tired. Leah froze. Her heart sank. The lock clicked, and the door opened. Hyeyeon stood in the doorway. She was wearing an old dressing gown, her face pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but not distorted by hysteria, as Leah had imagined. It was simply devastated and infinitely tired. She looked at her daughter, not with a scream, not with a hug, but with quiet, bottomless amazement, as if she were seeing a ghost. They stared at each other for a few seconds, which stretched into an eternity. Everything Leah had been thinking of saying, excuses, accusations, pleas for forgiveness, evaporated from her mind. All that remained was the unimaginable weariness on her mother's face and the lump in her own throat. Hyeyeon was the first to move. She took a step back, holding the door, and silently ushered her daughter inside. The gesture was simple. Come in. This wasn't a celebration of the prodigal daughter's return. It was simply the opening of a door. But for Leah, at that moment, it meant more than any words. She stepped over the threshold, and the door closed behind her, cutting off the dark street, the dark SUV in the next alley, and that entire strange, terrifying stretch of her life that had begun with her escape. What would happen next, she didn't know, but the labyrinth she'd created had finally led her to the exit, even if it was to the threshold of the very place she'd fled. Leah walked along the familiar streets, but every step was a struggle. Physically, she barely felt tired. The adrenaline still drove her forward, but inside, everything was broken and confused. The backpack with Minho's things weighed her down, reminding her of the weeks spent in that strange, icy house that had first seemed like a refuge, but then began to resemble a beautiful prison. And now that she had left there herself, her thoughts finally stopped oscillating between resentment and fear, and began to slowly, inexorably return to what she had been running from. Her mother. She wasn't remembering the argument in the kitchen. That memory was blurry now, like an old photograph. She was remembering something else, how her mother, Hyeyeon, always left the light on in the hallway when she worked the night shift, a small, dim nightlight so that if Leah woke up, she wouldn't be afraid of the dark. How she bought her favorite cereal, even though Sada hated it and said it was all dye. How once, when Leah broke her arm in 5th grade, her mother slept for 3 nights in a hospital chair, never leaving her side, even though her own back hurt for a week afterward. She remembered her mother's voice, tired but warm, when she woke her up for school. Leah, darling, get up or you'll be late. And her eternal grumbling in response. Their final, fateful argument came flooding back, but now Leah saw it from a slightly different perspective. Yes, her mother had been adamant, but in her eyes, beyond the weariness, there was also worry, a genuine, visceral fear for her, which Leah had mistaken for a desire to control everything. She thought her mother didn't trust her, or perhaps her mother didn't trust the world, a world that, as it turned out, could indeed be dangerous. She herself had slept on a park bench and then spent 2 weeks living in the house of a stranger from the criminal underworld. Shame washed over her like such a wave that it took Leah's breath away. She stopped, leaning against a lamppost. What had she done? She'd run away, sending her mother, who was already working herself to the bone, into a frenzy of worry. She hadn't answered a single phone call, hadn't let anyone know she was there. And then she'd been living with a stranger who bought her clothes and fed her, while her mother was probably calling morgues and hospitals. The thought was unbearable. Leah began walking again, almost running, as if she could outrun herself. Here was her street. Here was her yard, with the same broken swing and someone's wrecked car parked there. Everything was so familiar and yet so foreign at the same time. She approached the entrance. The door, as always, was not fully closed. She stepped inside. A musty smell, with hints of old linoleum, cleaning products, and someone's cooking, assaulted her nose. It was the smell of home, not sterile, not smelling of expensive wood and cleanliness, like Minho's. It was the smell of life, imperfect, but real. She climbed the stairs. A dim light glowed on the landing in front of their door. Leah froze. Her hand instinctively reached for her pocket, but the key, of course, was gone. She'd left it there, on the nightstand in her room 2 weeks ago. She needed to call. Just press the doorbell. But her finger hovered a centimeter from the plastic button. What would she say? "Hi, Mom. It's me. I'm back?" What if Mom didn't want to see her? What if she was so angry that... No, she couldn't think that it was Mom. She gathered all her willpower and pressed the doorbell. The bell rang behind the door, sharp and indifferent, silence. Then, footsteps, not quick, not running toward the door. Slow, heavy, shuffling. Leah felt her heart sink into her heels. The lock clicked. The door opened, not wide, just enough for a face to appear in the crack. Mother. Leah saw her and barely suppressed a gasp. Hye-yeon had aged 10 years. Her face was gray and haggard, with huge purple circles under her eyes. Her eyes, usually so lively and stern, were empty, dull. They stared at Leah expressionlessly, as if they didn't recognize her, as if they were seeing something very far away. She was wearing an old, faded dressing gown, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. They looked at each other in silence. Leah expected screams, tears, reproaches, but there was only this deathly, exhausted silence. "Mom," Leah whispered, her voice breaking. Hye-yeon blinked. Slowly, as if every movement caused pain. She didn't rush to hug her. She didn't slam the door. She simply stepped back, holding onto the frame, and silently gestured for her to enter. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness, but one of complete, devastating surrender. As if she had no energy left, even for emotion. Leah crossed the threshold. The familiar hallway. The coat rack where her old school backpack hung. The mirror in which she so often twirled before leaving. Everything was in its place, but it seemed covered in ash. Hye-yeon closed the door and, without looking at her daughter, wandered into the kitchen. Leah, throwing off her backpack, trailed after her. The kitchen was untidy. A mug of half-drunk iced tea sat on the table, with a pack of painkillers lying nearby. A single plate and fork lay in the sink. Leah suddenly realized with horror. Her mother had probably been eating only once a day these past few days, or had forgotten to eat at all. Hyun sat down on a chair and stared at the table. She still didn't look at Leah. "You're alive," she finally said. Her voice was hoarse, lifeless, like the creak of an unoiled door. "Yes," Leah forced out. "Mom, Where have you been?" Hyun asked, still staring at the table. Leah realized she couldn't speak the truth. Not now. Not when her mother looked like this. With a woman. A distant acquaintance. I spent the night at her place, and then I stayed longer. It was a pathetic, transparent lie, but Hyun only shook her head weakly, as if she hadn't even listened. "I thought you were dead," she said simply, without pathos. "I went to the morgue for 3 days to look at the girls. Then I stopped, because I realized that if I saw you there, I'd go crazy. So I just waited for them to call." Leah felt the floor give way beneath her feet. She clutched the back of the chair. The picture her mother's words painted was so monstrous that her brain refused to process it. "Mom, in the morgue, looking at bodies. Mom, I'm sorry." A stifled groan escaped her throat. Tears that hadn't come in weeks now poured down. "I didn't mean to. I know I didn't mean to," Hye-yeon interrupted. And for the first time, a drop of something living, an endless, debilitating pain, burst into her voice. "You never think, Leah. You live as if the whole world revolves around your I want or I don't want. What do I want? What happens to me when you disappear? It never occurs to you." She looked up at her, and there was no anger in those eyes, There was such a deep, all-consuming weariness and disappointment there that it physically hurt Leah. "I'm tired, Leah," Hyeon said quietly. "I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of fighting alone. Tired of my love for you feeling like a prison. Maybe I really am a bad mother, since you ran away." "No!" Leah screamed, falling to her knees in front of her and grabbing her cold hands. "No, Mom, it's not like that. It was me. I was stupid, selfish. I didn't understand anything." Hyun didn't take her hands away. She simply looked at her sobbing daughter, and quiet, silent tears slowly trickled down her own wrinkled cheeks. "Get up," she finally whispered. "Go wash your face. You look terrible." It wasn't forgiveness, it was a truce. An acknowledgement that they were both too exhausted to sort things out now. That the worst part, the uncertainty, was behind them. Their daughter was alive. She was home. Everything else could be dealt with later, someday. Leah, sobbing, rose and wandered into the bathroom. Seeing her reflection in the mirror, a pale, haggard face, frightened eyes, she burst into tears again. She washed her face with icy water, trying to wash away the traces of her escape, the traces of Minho's house, the traces of her own madness. When she returned to the kitchen, a glass of warm milk and a cheese sandwich were already on the table. Her mother was gone. Leah drank the milk, barely tasting it, and went to her room. She opened the door. The room smelled of dust and loneliness, but it was her scent. Her books, her posters, her unmade bed. Everything was just as she had left it, as if time had stopped there that very night. She sat down on the bed and hugged her old, tattered teddy bear, pressing her face against its rough fabric. And only then, in the silence of her room, in the safety of her own four walls, did she allow the full weight of what had happened to crash down on her. She cried quietly, desperately, repenting to the emptiness of what she had done to her mother, and thanking some higher power for still leaving the door open for her. Beyond the wall, in her bedroom, Hyeon wasn't sleeping either. She lay staring at the ceiling, listening to her daughter's muffled sobs. There was no joy in her heart. There was only a heavy, cold stone of relief and a black, bottomless pit of fatigue that needed to be filled. Her daughter had returned, but she didn't know what would happen tomorrow. Too much was broken, too much needed fixing, and it seemed she had no strength left for it. But she opened the door. It was a beginning. Morning came. Leah awoke to the familiar street noise, absent from Minho's quiet house. Sunlight streamed through her old curtains, illuminating the familiar cracks in the ceiling. For a second, she felt as if the last 2 weeks had been a strange, heavy dream. But then she remembered everything. Minho's cold eyes at breakfast, the half-open door, the long walk home, and her mother's face, devastated, almost lifeless. She lay motionless, listening to the sounds in the apartment, silence. Not a single footstep, not a single clink of dishes. Her heart sank with fear. What if Mom had left? What if she didn't want to see her? Leah stood carefully and tiptoed out into the hallway. The door to Mom's room was ajar. Leah peered inside. The bed was empty, made up. The room smelled of sleep and fatigue. So Mom was already up. She went into the kitchen. Hyeon was sitting at the table, wearing the same old robe, looking out the window. An untouched cup of coffee sat in front of her. She heard footsteps and slowly turned her head. Her face was still pale, but her eyes no longer held that frightening emptiness. There was a deep, all-pervading weariness and something else, a complex mixture of pain, relief, and indecision. "Good morning," Leah said quietly, stopping in the doorway. Hyeon nodded, but said nothing. She looked out the window again. Leah felt a lump rise in her throat. This silence, this 2-meter distance from the kitchen, felt like an insurmountable chasm. She took a step forward. "Mom, I want to talk." "Eat first," Hyeon interrupted, still looking out the window. "The milk is in the fridge. The cereal is in the cupboard." It wasn't an invitation, but a statement of fact, carrying by inertia. Leah obediently opened the refrigerator and took out the milk. Her hands were shaking. She poured cereal into a bowl, sat down across from her mother, and began eating. Barely tasting it. Each sip was a struggle. She glanced furtively at her mother. She sat motionless, as if her internal motor was running at its lowest revs. just to keep her alive. Leah finished her meal and pushed her plate away. Mom, please listen to me. Just listen. Haeyeon slowly turned her gaze to her. There was anticipation in her eyes, and the protective wall that Leah had erected herself. I was a terrible fool. The biggest fool in the world. I didn't run away because I hated you. I ran away because I thought you weren't listening to me, that you saw me as an eternal child. And I decided to prove I was an adult. Like this, stupidly. By leaving. She spoke quickly, afraid of being interrupted or running out of words. I didn't think how it would turn out. I didn't think I'd oversleep in the park, and that I'd end up in a strange house, with a strange man. Her voice trembled. He was stern, cold, but he didn't touch me. He just gave me food and a place to sleep. And then everything changed. It became completely unbearable, and I ran away from there too. She fell silent, swallowing tears. Haeyeon listened, motionless. Her face was expressionless. But while I was walking back, Leah continued, now sobbing, I thought only of you, about how you left the light on in the hallway for me, how you bought my cereal, how you sat with me in the hospital. And I realized that your no's aren't because you don't trust me. It's because you're afraid for me. And I was too stupid to understand that. I put you through hell. I saw what you looked like. Mom, I'm so guilty. She couldn't speak anymore. She laid her head on the table and burst into tears, her shoulders shaking with silent, desperate sobs. All of her teenage armor, all her stubbornness and anger, all of it crumbled to dust, leaving only the naked, childish horror of what she had done and endless remorse. For a long time, only her sobs could be heard in the kitchen. Then the creak of a chair was heard. Haeyeon stood up. She approached her daughter, not quickly, slowly, as if every movement required incredible effort. She stopped next to her, looking at Leah's shaking back. A struggle played across her face. The pain of betrayal warred with instinct, with that same unconditional, animalistic connection that made her look at the unfamiliar children's faces in the morgue. She extended her hand, stopped, clenched her fingers into a fist, then unclenched them again, and finally, slowly, almost hesitantly, she placed her hand on her daughter's head. A warm, rough hand from work. Leah flinched at the touch and froze. The sobbing stopped for a second. Haeyeon's fingers moved slightly, tangling in her hair. Then his other hand settled on her shoulder. And suddenly, as if a dam holding everything inside had burst, Haeyeon leaned down and embraced her daughter. She hugged her tightly, desperately, holding her close, not like an adult holding a child, but like a drowning person holding a straw. There was no instant forgiveness in that embrace. It contained all the pain, all the fear, all the relief, and that fierce, ineradicable love that, even after such betrayal, proved stronger than anything. Leah wrapped her arms around her mother, clutching her robe, and burst into tears again, but this time because the door didn't close, because they let her back in, because her mother's hands, though shaking from exhaustion and tears, were holding her. They stood there in the middle of the kitchen, in a pool of morning light, two broken, crying women, holding each other because there was nothing else to hold on to. This embrace didn't erase the past. It didn't solve the problems of the future, but it was a bridge across the chasm, the first, most difficult step on the path back to each other. Meanwhile, on a deserted road a few kilometers outside the city, a black SUV was parked. Minho leaned on the hood, finishing the sandwich Chan had handed him. The morning sun was warm, but the night's chill still hung in the air. Chan, sitting behind the wheel with the door open, stared at his tablet. "The police report has been withdrawn," he reported monotonously. "The wording is found with distant relatives, misunderstanding. No questions," Minho nodded, not taking his eyes off the country road. "The woman didn't show up for work this morning. She took sick leave to care for her child," Chan continued. "She stopped at the pharmacy. She bought some sedatives and vitamins." "Vitamins?" Minho looked distracted for a moment, and something resembling a smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. "Already better than painkillers." He brushed crumbs from his fingers and took the tablet from Chan. The screen displayed a real-time map with a single stationary dot. The signal from the beacon in his backpack. The dot hadn't moved for several hours. It was right where it should have been, in Leah's apartment. Minho turned off the tablet and handed it back. That's it. We're packing up. You can pick up the tracker in a couple of days when you're in the area. Discreetly. Yes, Chan answered shortly. Minho stood for a moment, looking toward the town hidden behind the hills. His face was calm. Fragments of the last 2 weeks flashed through his head. The frightened girl on the bench, her stubborn silence, her quiet confessions in the kitchen. Stupid, impulsive, vulnerable, like everyone her age. But not angry, lost. He did what he thought was right, not out of generosity, rather out of principle. He identified a problem on his own territory and resolved it in what he considered the cleanest way possible. Without unnecessary fuss, without involving the authorities, with minimal risk to himself. And, oddly enough, with an acceptable outcome for everyone. He imagined that same tired nurse and her wayward daughter. They were probably trying to talk now, or just sitting in heavy silence. It would be difficult, very difficult. Trust, once shattered, was harder to mend than the most fragile vase, but they had a chance now. They would have to take it. Or not. It was no longer his business. Minho pushed himself off the hood. Fine lines appeared briefly at the corners of his eyes, across his usually impassive face. It wasn't a smile of joy or affection. Rather, it was an expression of cool, professional satisfaction. A difficult task accomplished, the operation completed. The girl was home, the police weren't aware. His name hadn't surfaced, all clear. Let's go, he said, getting into the car. Business doesn't wait. Chan started the engine. The SUV turned smoothly and sped down the empty road away from the city, leaving behind a world of family drama, tears, and hopes, which Minho had invaded for 2 weeks and from which he had now just as calmly and methodically retreated. His work here was done. The first days after their return were like walking on thin ice. A hug in the kitchen had created a fragile bridge, but stepping off it was terrifying. Leah and Hyeon moved around each other cautiously, barely speaking, but not slamming doors either. The silence between them was no longer hostile, but wary, full of the unspoken. They didn't make peace with words. They made peace with actions. The next morning, Leah woke up early. She went into the kitchen and saw that her mother, getting ready for her morning shift, had left money and a note on her desk. Buy something tasty for dinner yourself. It wasn't just a request. It was a trust. Small, but important. Leah spent the entire day shopping, carefully choosing what her mother liked and disliked. That evening, she didn't just buy food, she tried to cook dinner. It didn't turn out very well. The rice was burnt, and the fish was oversalted. When Hyeon returned, tired, and saw the set table and her embarrassed daughter in an apron, she said nothing. She simply sat down and began to eat, slowly overcoming her fatigue, and finished it all. That was her answer. Leah started cleaning the apartment without being reminded. Not perfectly, but diligently. Hyeon noticed the washed floor in the hallway and the clean mirror in the bathroom. She said nothing, but one evening, while Leah was studying, her mother placed a cup of hot cocoa next to her, the same one with marshmallows that Leah loved as a child. No words. She simply placed it and left. The conversations returned gradually. At first, about everyday matters, very cautiously. Mom, the washing machine is humming. I know. We'll call a repairman on the weekend. Do you have a night shift tomorrow? No, a day shift. Then, a few days later at dinner, Leah, looking at her plate, asked, Mom, what were you doing when I wasn't there? Hyeon was silent for a long time. Waiting, she finally answered simply. And afraid, and hoping you'd be smart enough to call. I'm sorry, Leah whispered. Me too, Hyeon said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't hear you then, that I just yelled and told you not to. It wasn't a pretty let's forget everything. It was an admission of mutual guilt. Bitter, but necessary. After this conversation, the tension eased somewhat. They began watching TV together in the evenings, silently, each in their own corner of the sofa, but no longer like two lonely islands. Minho's things. went up to her mother, and dumped everything on the sofa. This! He bought me while I was there. Hyoyeon looked at the expensive, impersonal things. Her face hardened. Throw them away. But they're new, Leah began. Throw them away, Leah, her mother repeated, and her voice took on the same firmness familiar from past arguments, but now directed in a different direction. We won't keep things from that person. No reminders. The next day, they took the bag containing these items to the charity container together. It was a ritual of purification, severing the last material connection to that time. True reconciliation came later. On a quiet night, Leah was tormented by a nightmare. She was running away from Minho's house again. Down the dark road, headlights chasing after her from behind. She woke up in a sweat, the sheets flung to the floor. Without thinking, she went to her mother's room. Hyoyeon was also awake, lying with her eyes open. Mom, can I? Leah began at the threshold. Come here, Hyeon interrupted, throwing back the edge of the blanket. Leah lay down next to her, her back pressed against her mother's, the way she had done as a small child when she was afraid of thunder. Hyoyeon didn't hug her. She simply covered her with the edge of the blanket. Sleep, she said quietly. I'm here. And Leah fell asleep, feeling truly home and safe for the first time in weeks. Not because of the high fence outside, but because her mother was breathing behind her. They still had much to discuss. Trust had to be earned anew, step by step. But the war was over. The difficult, silent work of restoring peace had begun, and they were both ready to take it on. For Minho, life returned to normal. The very next day, there was no transition period, no reflection. There was work. The morning began with a meeting in his office. 3 men in formal suits arrived. They discussed supplies, payments, and new contracts. Minho sat at the head of the table, his face a stony mask of concentration. He asked clear questions, gave orders, his voice even and dispassionate. No one in the room could have guessed that just yesterday this man had been providing security and planning the escape of a confused teenager. That was another part of his life, and he knew how to keep them separate. After the meeting, he made several phone calls. His voice was sometimes harsh, sometimes convincingly calm. He was solving problems, resolving conflicts, making plans. Everything as usual. That afternoon, he left for the port for a meeting. Chan was driving. Driving through the city, Minho caught a glimpse of a group of schoolgirls chatting near the entrance to a cafe. One of them, with blonde hair, briefly reminded him of Leah. He didn't linger. His thoughts were already on the upcoming negotiations. That evening, he returned to his empty, immaculate house. Silence enveloped him again, but this time it was his silence. Familiar, controlled. He went into his office, checked his email, and reviewed his reports. Everything was in order. Before bed, he went into the very room where Leah had lived. It had been cleaned to the point of sterility. There were no signs of her presence. Chan, as ordered, had taken out everything, the bed linens and towels. The room had once again become neutral territory, ready to welcome the next temporary guest or remain empty. Minho stood in the doorway for a moment. He felt no nostalgia or warmth. He was simply stating a fact. The task was accomplished. The room was clear. The system was working. He went to bed. His sleep, as usual, was deep and dreamless. No girls on benches, no tired mothers in the morgue. Only the emptiness of a well-rested mind. The next morning, Chan, serving him coffee, briefly reported, "The tracker has been recovered. The signal disappeared yesterday when they threw out the backpack. No further surveillance is being conducted." Minho nodded, taking a sip from his cup. "Okay, close the subject." They never spoke of it again. The episode with Leah was finally filed away and forgotten. In Minho's world, there was no room for sentimentality or lengthy reflection. There were tasks, risks, and decisions. This task was solved in a clean, elegant way, with minimal effort. It averted a potential scandal, avoided police attention, and even, oddly enough, helped resolve the situation. In terms of efficiency, it was flawless. He returned to his life, a life of power, calculation, and constant vigilance. Sometimes, in the rare moments of a calm between tasks, he remembered not Leah herself, but her words about his mother, who was just really tired. In his world, fatigue was a weakness for which one paid dearly, but in that other world, perhaps it was simply a fact of life. He brushed these thoughts aside like an annoying fly. They had no value. They had no impact on profit or safety. Minho was back in the swing of things. Business trips, meetings, problem solving. His life was on track, fast, powerful, predictable. The story of the girl who ran away from home had become just a blip for him, a minor deviation from the course, quickly and professionally corrected. Nothing personal, just business. And now business continued. Time passed, blurring the sharp edges. Leah's school routine returned to normal. Lessons, homework, walks with friends after school. Sometimes, when she was alone in her room or looking out the bus window on the way somewhere, fragments of those strange 2 weeks would emerge in her memory. She didn't remember them with longing or fear. Rather, with a slight shudder, as one might recall a very strange, almost unreal dream. She remembered not Minho himself. His face had become blurry in her memory, but the sensations, the oppressive silence of his enormous house, the scent of cleanliness and expensive wood, which didn't smell like home, the taste of the impersonal food that was delivered on schedule, and that icy, indifferent look with which he had looked at her in recent days. It was that look that now made her appreciate even her mother's stern, tired face, because in it, even in anger, there was life. There was care. Sometimes, when her mother told her no again, and the prohibitions hadn't gone away, they were just discussed more often now, Leah caught herself thinking, Minho would have just said no, without explanation, period. And this helped her not to get angry, but to try to understand her mother's reasons. She learned to ask, Mom, why not? And Yeon, though not always right away, began to try to explain, not because I said so, but because I'm afraid that, or because last time, life was getting better. Slowly, with difficulty, with occasional arguments and awkward moments. But they were learning to listen. Trust, like a broken vase, was mended piece by piece, with the golden varnish of patience and small daily efforts. Leah began helping out more around the house, not as atonement, but simply to make her mother less tired. Yeon tried to arrange their evening at least once a week, watching a movie together or simply chatting over tea. Dreams of a dark road and headlights behind her became less frequent. And when they did, Leah would wake up, hear her mother's breathing through the wall, and fall asleep again. She was home. Minho's office was in its usual order. On the desk lay neatly stacked documents, a tablet with graphs, a cup of cold tea, espresso. It was a normal workday. Chan walked in without knocking, only he could, and placed a small plain A5 envelope in front of Minho, among other correspondence. No logos, no return address. Handwritten on the envelope, in a neat but hesitant hand, was just one address, his office, and his name. Minho, talking on the phone, instinctively picked up the envelope. The paper was cheap and thin. He ended the call, hung up, and opened the envelope with a sharp letter opener. Inside was a folded sheet of paper from an ordinary school notebook, written in the same handwriting, in fountain pen, with blots and uneven lines. Dear Mr. Minho, is Hye Young, Leah's mother, writing to you. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by sending this letter, or if you'll even read it. But I have to. I don't know who you really are, and I don't want to know. I only know that you found my daughter when she was alone and vulnerable, and you didn't harm her. I know that you gave her shelter and food when she needed it. And I know that in the end, you allowed her to come back to me. Perhaps for you, it was simply the solution to a problem. For me, it was the return of my life. Words can't describe the horror I went through, nor the relief when she returned. You were the one who broke that cycle. A random passerby who happened to be in the right place. Or maybe not. It's not for me to judge. Leah and I are at home now. It's hard for us. We've destroyed a lot and are now trying to rebuild. But we're together, and we have this chance. So, as strange as it may seem, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for making sure nothing happened to her during those days. Thank you for letting her come back. And thank you, as silly as it may sound, for the cold lessons she learned there. Sometimes you need to see another's emptiness to appreciate your own, however imperfect, warmth. I don't expect an answer, and I won't bother you anymore. I just wanted you to know, your actions, whatever their motives, have given me my daughter back. And her a mother. That's priceless. Sincerely, Hyun. Minho finished reading the letter. His face remained expressionless. He placed the piece of paper back on the table and stared at it for a few seconds, as one might examine an unfamiliar but harmless object. Then he slowly folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and set it aside. Not in the desk drawer with the important papers. Not in the waste paper basket. He placed it on the edge of the desk, under the heavy metal ashtray, as if reserving the decision of what to do with it for later. He picked up the next paper from the stack, a monthly delivery report. He began reading. His thoughts had already returned to the numbers, to logistics, to profit calculations. But when Chan came in half an hour later to pick up the signed documents, he noticed that the plain envelope was still lying under the ashtray on the edge of the table. And Minho, as he signed the contract, briefly glanced at the dark window, beyond which evening was slowly descending, and something distant, almost elusive, flashed in his usually perfectly focused eyes. Not warmth, not remorse, just recognition. Acknowledgement that somewhere out there, in another distant world, his calculating, cold actions had accidentally, defying all logic, resulted in something someone had called, "thank you." He blinked, and the expression disappeared. He handed Chan the signed papers. "That's it, you can send it." "An envelope?" Chan asked curtly, nodding toward the table. Minho looked at the cheap paper, pressed down by the heavy glass of the ashtray. "Leave it." Chan nodded and left. Minho immersed himself in his work again. There was no room for sentimentality in his world, but that envelope, that simple thank you from a tired woman from another dimension, remained on the table, not as a trophy, not as a memento, simply as a fact. As a reminder that even the purest, most emotionless calculations sometimes have strange, unpredictable consequences that cannot be calculated in tables and graphs. He didn't smile. He wasn't moved. He simply continued working. But perhaps the next time he drove past a park at night, his gaze would linger for a second on an empty bench, and he'd lightly press the gas pedal to speed past. Because his world and that world should remain separate, and he, Minho, master of controlled situations, preferred it that way.